Hello everybody, it's Sheena with the Sheena Monet Movement. I hope you're having a good day. So today I am in Ellington, Florida, and I am standing in front of the Gamble Mansion on the Gamble Plantation. I'm going to tell you this before I start reading the information that I have. It was a great tour. The tour guide actually gave us facts about the enslaved people, which I appreciate very much because, as you all know, a lot of plantation tours, they don't want to talk about the enslaved population, but on this tour, I learned a lot about the enslaved population, and I was allowed to record. So that's what I really appreciated about this tour. I got my money's worth. So here's the information that I have about the Gamble Plantation. The coastal area was inhabited by varying cultures of indigenous people. The historic tribes included the Coboga, the Yamasee, Creek, Seminole, and Muskogee people. At the end of the Second Seminole War in 1842, Major Robert Gamble, who served in the Florida War, received 160 acres for homesteading under the Armed Occupation Act. The Gamble Plantation became a sugar mill plantation. Gamble acquired 3,500 acres. The sugar planter enslaved 200 people of African descent. The Gamble Mansion was built by enslaved laborers. So this is the Gamble Mansion right here, built by enslaved laborers. Everything in there is still intact. It is extremely sturdy. I just did a tour and walked through that entire mansion. Extremely sturdy, still here. It's not going anywhere. It's been here ever since the enslaved black laborers built it. Now, the Gamble Plantation house still stands, but the Gamble Sugar Mill, one of the antebellum era's largest sugar mill, was destroyed by the Union Raiders in 1864. So I'm gonna go to that location and show you how the sugar mill ruins look now. Pieces of it is still there. So here are the ruins. You can see this was built by black enslaved laborers, and it was destroyed in 1864 by Union Raiders. So this is all they have left of it right here. The interesting thing about this right here is it was destroyed by Union soldiers. A lot of times when I've gone to like plantation ruins, sugar mill ruins, they have been destroyed by Seminoles during the Seminole War. But this one in particular was destroyed by Union soldiers in 1864, right before 1865 when the slaves were freed. So I found that interesting. This is like my fourth plantation tour in Florida. And I keep running into this type of information. I want to share this with you. After the Seminole Wars, I noticed how many white soldiers, many white veterans are the ones who acquired land in Florida after the Seminole Wars. The black soldiers did not acquire any land. They were also in these Seminole Wars, but they were forced to be in the Seminole Wars by their enslavers. So they were just in a part of these wars for supporting roles, for labor, and for combat. And they were also experiencing discrimination and harsh treatment while they were fighting in the Seminole Wars alongside white soldiers. But once the Seminole Wars were over, most of the land in Florida was given to white soldiers who fought in the Seminole Wars, like mainly for free because they were given to them through land grants. The federal government confiscated much of the Seminole land and encouraged white settlement to stabilize and develop the region. The white men who fought gained access to Florida land through military bounty programs or land grants. The black soldiers received nothing because they were enslaved people. Most of them were forced to serve by their enslavers. Black soldiers were excluded entirely from receiving any land grants. So I found that a little upsetting, and it kind of helps you realize why so much land is owned by mainly white families, is black soldiers did not receive anything after the Seminole War. So found that a little upsetting. Although this was a great tour, the tour guide left out who built the sugar mill plantation, who built that structure. He left out that the African enslaved people are the ones who built everything. He did tell us that the enslaver is the one who built everything, but he forgot to mention that the enslaver is the one who forced black people, African people, to build the ruins that's on the plantation sugar mill. They were forced to build all of this stuff. So, but other than that, he gave us some great information. I really enjoyed this tour, and I would hope other plantations follow suit and tell us about the enslaved population. I was hoping to see like slave quarters on the plantation, but they're taken down. That's okay, because he still pointed out where they used to live, where the enslaved people lived. So I appreciated that a lot. Another interesting thing I learned about the Gamble Plantation is the Gamble family, they are actually from Tallahassee. So the owner for this plantation was Robert Gamble, and his father is who asked him to come this way because of the land being so rich. It was very interesting because that's where I live, Tallahassee, Florida. And there's a street called Gamble Street. So I wanted to read the literature that I found inside their visiting office. The Second Seminole War ended in 1842, thus opening the area for settlement. The mild climate and fertile soil attracted men of sufficient means to engage in large-scale cultivation of sugarcane and its manufacture into sugar. The planter, Major Robert Gamble, was supported in this venture by his father, John Grafton Gamble of Tallahassee, Florida. This is the interesting part. From a comparatively small acreage, Gamble increased his holdings until he had a plantation of 3,450 acres. About 15 acres were under cultivation. Slaves from family plantations near Tallahassee were brought by water from St. Mark's Island. He brought modern machinery from New Orleans for the sugar refinery, which would have an annual capacity of about 1,500 hogshead or barrels of sugar. I thought that was interesting because St. Mark's, I had found out some information about St. Mark's being where a lot of enslaved people were brought to be sold off to different plantations. I learned that about St. Mark's, and then it says here that's where they got the slaves from, St. Mark's, and they were shipped down here in a boat. So this is the front part of the house. Still intact. Beautiful home, still built by Black enslaved laborers. It's a beautiful home still. The tour guide is truthful, and that's what I appreciate about this tour.
Robert Gamble was here for 12 years, from 1844 to 1856. And while he was here, he built up a debt to his creditors of $190,000. Well, in order to pay off that debt, he sold his estate to his creditors and moved back to Tallahassee, where he came from. You'll see a portrait of Major Robert Gamble, a man who built this house. He lived to the age of 92 before he passed away in the year 1906 in Tallahassee. The slaves are bringing the entrees from the kitchen, which is in the back of the house, through this doorway right here, place the entrees up on the sideboard, so only enough room set up there now. Then they would serve. Gamble and his guests would be sitting here at the dining room table, and of course, Gamble would always want to have the finest china and crystal set out in order to give that look of a wealthy landowner. And we have 2-foot solid thick concrete walls in here made out of local concrete called tabby. Tabby was made out of crushed and burned oyster shells, sand, and water. And of course, when you have 2-foot solid thick concrete walls, that also helps to keep it cooler inside the house. And if you look between the ceiling and the wall, you notice there's a molding that goes all the way around the room. That is your picture molding. Now remember, the walls are made out of tabby, which is a concrete. So trying to put a nail into that tabby would be virtually impossible without chipping it away. So they take these picture moldings, move it a quarter inch off the ceiling. Go ahead, nail or screw those into the walls because they're not going anywhere. Put hooks in different places where they thought they wanted to have pictures hang down, and they can hang the pictures down along the sides of the walls. And that way, whenever they wanted to move a picture around, they didn't need to worry about spackling up those holes in the walls like we do today. You just slide those hooks back and forth. Pretty good idea. Now, Robert Gamble came here. It's a very isolated area. The nearest store at that time, 220 miles to the north in St. Mark's, Florida, just south of Tallahassee. So they only made one trip to the store a month. What they do in between that trip, well, they have their own livestock here, and they grew their own crops. Corn, beans, cotton, tobacco, potatoes, rice, citrus, olives, and grapes. Now, all those I've mentioned to you are just for use here on the plantation. His major cash crop was sugarcane. And one of the items I mentioned to you was tobacco, and that's what I've got right here. This is a plug or twisted chewing tobacco. And they carry these around out in the fields. We're going to take a chaw, just pull it on out, bite a piece off, and start chewing on it. Now, when you're chewing on tobacco, you get tobacco juice, and you have to spit that out. That's why we have spittoons. One over here underneath this desk, another one over here underneath this table, and you just spit out that tobacco juice into those spittoons. This is tabby concrete right here. You can see those crushed and burned oyster shells inside there. You get that crushing and burning action on those shells. It makes the lime secrete out of it. You mix in sand and water, it binds it all together, and it forms tabby concrete. Now, all the tabby that you see on this house is original tabby from Robert Gamble's time 180 years ago. And it is the only thing on the house that is original. Gamble had 2 sugar mills. First sugar mill burned down in 1849. It was made out of all cypress wood, got caught on fire by a lightning strike, and it burned down to the ground rather easily. So he decided to build a second sugar mill, which is the one in the picture right here. He wanted to build a little bit more fireproof than that first sugar mill, so he built it out of that tabby brick. You notice the brick walls along the sides, the brick chimneys up on top. That make it a lot more fireproof than that first sugar mill ever was. Good example of the inside workings of that second sugar mill in this picture. And I do have a map over here on this wall of all of Robert Gamble's land holdings, 34 acres in all. You notice a lighter shade of green and a darker shade of green. The lighter shade of green were areas that were cleared out. The darker shade were areas that were uncleared. Well, this is the kitchen. You look over here, you notice a fairly large fireplace. It is the largest fireplace in the entire house, and for good reason. They did all their cooking right here in this fireplace. Usually had a fire going there all the time. With that fire going there all the time like that, you'd have hot ash when you're toiling upon this fireplace, and you could actually use that hot ash to cook on. Now, one of the things you notice missing in here is an oven. How would you bake things like pies, cakes, and bread? You can use this pan here. This is known as a spider pan, and this is used to bake with. Now, see, make some cornbread. You take the cornmeal and the flour to the dry storage area right over here, make it into a dough. Take that dough, put it inside this spider pan, put this top back on, and take the entire pan, put it in the fireplace, and bury it up in that hot ash. And you'd be cooking from the bottom and the top evenly, just like an oven does. And that's how you bake your pies, cakes, and breads. This item here is a crop bean roaster. They did not grow coffee here on the plantation. They had to buy it in bulk, and they went to the store once a month. And they bought their beans raw and unroasted. And here's a good example of raw and roasted coffee beans right here. You would take those raw beans, put them into the roaster, take the roaster, put it into the fire, turn the handle on it. That way you roast the beans without burning them. Pull them out. Now you have roasted beans you can see here. Take those roasted beans, put them on top of the coffee grinder here. Close it up, turn the wheel, and grind them up, and you have freshly ground coffee down below, just like this. The small white dish you see here is known as a pap dish. This was used to feed infants. They didn't have bottles back in those days, so they would use the pap dish to feed the infants their milk formula or mashed up food. And we have the dry sink area over here against the wall. They did not have any water inside the house. They bring in buckets of water from the water cistern, place them in myself, and then wash hands or dishes right out of the bucket. Any water that would spill out of that bucket would spill into the dry sink area here and not onto the floors when you're finished. Sop up all that water out of the dry sink area, squeeze it back into the bucket. Take that bucket of dirty water around the back side of the house and water your gardens with it. The original floor in this section of the home was a dirt floor. This concrete floor was put in about 60 years ago for the convenience of our visitors, so they didn't track dirt in and out of the house all the time. This is the slave workroom, not to be confused with the slave quarters. The slave quarters were halfway behind the house where the sugar mill was. They made out of palm logs and thatch roofs and destroyed right after Gamble left here in 1856. Now you had 3 different classifications of slaves in Robert's day. You had your field hands, work down the fields, harvesting, planting, clear your property out. Then your second class of slave were your skilled labor slave. That was any slave that a skilled worker could use to build his plantation up. If you look over against the wall, you see there's a cobbler's bench where shoemaking is a skill. Blacksmith, carpenter, wheelwright, cooper. Anyone that a skilled worker could use to build his plantation up, you would use a skilled labor slave. And then your top class of slave were your household slaves. Any slave that worked inside the house, either in here ironing or sewing, working inside the kitchen preparing the meals, or working inside the main house being a butler or maid. Now I mentioned ironing to you. This is the type of iron that they've used right here. The top of this comes off of here and you fill the bottom section up with hot ash and coal from the fireplace. Place this top back on and lock it, and then you go and iron. Now this weighs about 15 pounds when it's fully loaded up. So you can imagine using this for 7 or 8 hours a day. They also made lye soap, so that you see here out of animal lard and ash. They would take the ash and pour water through it to get the lye out of it. Take the lye, mix it into the animal fat, and cook it to get the excess water out of it. Take what was left over, cut it into slices, and let it cool off, and you have lye soap left over. This item here is a candlestick. If you came into a room that was dark and you didn't have any candles or lamps, you take a piece of kindling wood, either pine or cypress, clip it on here and light up the other end, and it would light up the room quite nicely. And they also make candles here out of bayberry wax. You get a big vat of that bayberry wax, you're going to cook it to get the excess water out of it. And then they do something called the stick and wick method, where they would tie the wicks onto a stick, similar to what you see here, and they just dip them into the wax, pull out, let them dry, dip them in again, pull out, let them dry. And you could do that as many times as you wanted to a certain thickness of candle that you wanted. Now, eventually they came up with candle molds, as you see here against the wall, which make it a lot easier for us to make candles. But they still use this method for specialty candles, because you can make any desired thickness you wanted to with this method, and with that, you can only make one, tall and thin. Over in the corner, you see a good example of a bathtub. Gamble would have his slaves carry the bathtub upstairs into his bedroom. Then they bring buckets of water up, usually heated first, and pour them into the bathtub as Gamble was taking his bath. And over in this corner, you see a good example of cotton on the branch. They did grow cotton here on the plantation, just for use here on the plantation. They would take that cotton and run it off on the spinning wheel into yarn, take the yarn and loom it into thread, and then they could make their own clothing, sheets, and quilts. Remember, they only made one trip to the store a month, so they'd be very self-sufficient. And this is a good example of that self-sufficiency I was speaking to you about a bit earlier, make your own clothing, sheets, and quilts. When you finish with this item, you use this one right here, it's called a weasel. This is used to measure the yarn and the thread. Nothing ever went to waste here on the plantation. You always want to know exactly how much you had of everything, and that's the reason for this. It'd go around 50 times for the counter, which is in the square box. Go and click off, making the small button on top pop up, making a popping sound, of course. That's where we get the term, pop goes the weasel from, right there. Gamble was very concerned about the water when he got here. He knew that the groundwater had all sorts of disease and dysentery in it. Slaves couldn't work if they're sick all the time. Plus, had a funny sulfur taste to it, so he decided not to use that groundwater. He wanted to use rainwater. Look over here. You notice there's a downspout that comes off the top of the house and goes right into the other end of that water cistern. Now, the cistern is made of tabby, as you can see here. And holds about 40,000 gallons of water. And it's tipped slightly so that the water will work its way from one end of the cistern down there to this end right here where the bucket is. And if you look inside here, you can actually see there's a thin wall of tabby that goes right down the middle of the water cistern. And remember, tabby is made out of crushed and burnt oyster shells, which forms lime. And limestone is a natural water purifier. So the water actually worked its way through that thin tabby wall, purifying itself as it did so. No need to boil the water. Now the only problem he has is mosquitoes to get into the water and lay their eggs in there, so you have mosquito larvae floating around in your drinking water. So he went ahead and put minnows in there, little fish. The minnows would eat the mosquito larvae to the water as well as the algae to keep it from stagnating. So you had to worry about when you brought your bucket up was that you didn't have a fish in it. That was it. Plantation bell behind you there was used as a communication feature for the slaves out in the fields. If you had a fire or any attack here at the house, ring the bell. Slaves would hear the bell ring out in the fields and knew they had to come into the house to be communicated to or to help out. There you go. The bed that you see right here is a feather bed. If you ever slept on a feather bed, you know they can be very lumpy and that's uncomfortable to your back and neck. So they usually sent the slaves up an hour before bedtime with one of these. It is called a paddle or plumper. And the slaves would use these on the beds for about 30 to 45 minutes per bed, flattening and plumping the beds up so you could sleep on it comfortably that evening. Right, there you go right there. Square wooden one is known as a thunderbox. The one on top is known as a slop jar, honey pot, or some people call it a chamber pot. And you would just do what you needed to do in the middle of the night, and the household slaves would come and clean it up the next morning. Definitely makes you appreciate what you've got today.
Thank you so much for watching.